We start in the United States, where thousands of people have taken part in a huge civil rights rally in Washington to demand racial justice and an end to police brutality. It's being held in the same place and exactly 57 years after the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. made his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. It was planned as a response to the death of George Floyd and comes after another police shooting of an African-American man, Jacob Blake. Our correspondent, Barbara Plett-Usher, sent us this report.
In the year of 2020, this is what a march on Washington looks like. Drawing on the anger and energy of months of unrest around the country, now bringing their demands to the doorstep of power, aiming to forge a national movement out of their protests.
The widely heralded and in some quarters feared March on Washington.
They're deliberately connecting their modern-day struggle to the historic civil rights movement. The unprecedented March of 1963 that brought 250,000 people to Washington with a thunderous roar, demanding jobs and freedom. Nearly 60 years later, it's clear that not enough has changed.
I'm 33, and this was in my parents' time, so it's just like, okay, here we go again. So we're trying to make sure that we don't have to keep reliving this whole thing all over again.
I was not born when the first march happened, but I will be part of every movement if I need to until I go to my grave, until we get the justice and the equality that we deserve.
No justice, no peace.
The summer of discontent was fueled by the police killing of a black man, George Floyd. One name in a long list, an explosion of anger that has been building for years. Organizers believe this is the historical moment to push for concrete change.
What is this about? This is about equal treatment for black Americans, for them to be treated the same as white people, by the police and in other areas. That's what Black Lives Matter is about. And who would have thought nearly 60 years after one of the most famous civil rights rallies in U.S. history, they'd be back here again, demanding basic rights.
I'm marching for George, for Brianna, for Ahmaud, for Jacob.
Not in the same numbers, the pandemic has thinned the crowds. But everyone here can recite the grim roll call of names of those killed and injured by police violence. Their family members were the headline speakers, calling this generation to action.
How would the history books remember you? What will be your legacy? Will your future generations remember you for your complacency, your inaction? Or will they remember you for your empathy, your leadership, your passion?
As in 1963, the march is pushing for national legislation to reform how America is policed and to protect their voting rights, building on hard-won victories of the past.
We are going to be the generation that dismantles systemic racism once and for all, now and forever. We are going to be the generation that calls a halt to police brutality and gun violence once and for all, now and forever.
That this is happening in an election year added urgency to the agenda. Again and again, speakers called on protesters to get out and vote. There is hope. The proof of that will come later, maybe much later. Whether this is a decisive inflection point in a long struggle, or whether they'll be marching on Washington with the same demands in 50 years' time. Barbara Plett-Usher, BBC News, Washington.